The gunshot that shattered the morning silence sent Lucy Vaughn diving behind a water trough, her carpetbag splitting open and spilling her few worldly possessions into the mud-slicked street of Jefferson, Texas. She pressed her back against the rough wood, heart hammering as two men fired at each other across the dusty thoroughfare, their argument over a card game now turned deadly. This was the third town in as many months where violence had driven her away before she could find work, before she could find anything resembling a place to call home. When the shooting finally stopped and one man lay groaning while the other fled on horseback, Lucy gathered her scattered belongings with shaking hands. A worn Bible, two threadbare dresses, a daguerreotype of parents she barely remembered, and the last $3 to her name. She was 22 years old and had been running since she was 16, ever since the orphanage in St. Louis had turned her out with nothing but a patched valise and empty wishes for good fortune. "Miss, you hurt?" A calm, deep voice cut through her panic. Lucy looked up to find a tall man standing over her, his broad-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow against the bright Texas sun of late spring 1878. When he crouched down beside her, she saw eyes the color of honey, weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors, and an expression of genuine concern that made something in her chest tighten unexpectedly. "I'm fine," she managed, clutching her damaged carpetbag. "Just passing through." "Passing through to where?" He helped her to her feet with a gentle grip on her elbow, and she noticed the strength in his hands, the calluses that spoke of hard work. He stood well over 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore simple rancher's clothing, dusty from riding, and a gun belt that looked well used but not recently drawn. "Anywhere that's hiring," Lucy admitted, brushing mud from her already stained skirt. "I can cook, clean, mend, work a garden. I'm not afraid of hard work." The man studied her for a long moment, and Lucy fought the urge to look away from his steady gaze. She was used to men looking at her, used to having to deflect unwanted advances and crude suggestions. But this man's assessment felt different, like he was trying to gauge her character rather than her figure. "Name's Isaac Emerson," he finally said. "I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles outside town. Lost my housekeeper 2 weeks back when she decided to marry a shopkeeper and move to Galveston. Place is falling apart without someone to manage the house. You interested in honest work for honest pay?" Lucy wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. She'd learned long ago that nothing came without strings attached, that kindness from strangers usually had a price she couldn't afford to pay. But something about Isaac Emerson's straightforward manner, the lack of cunning in his eyes, made her hesitate. "What's the pay?" she asked cautiously. $30 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own quarters off the kitchen, door with a lock. I've got 4 ranch hands who bunk in the barn, and they know better than to bother anyone under my employ. House needs cooking for 5 men total, cleaning, laundry, mending, and whatever else you think needs doing. Sunday afternoons are yours to do as you please." It was more money than Lucy had ever been offered for domestic work. Enough to save, maybe even enough to one day have choices. Why would you offer this to a complete stranger? The words came out sharper than she intended, but years of disappointment had taught her suspicion. Isaac straightened, and something flickered across his face that might have been old pain. "Because I remember what it's like to need a chance," he said quietly. "And because I'm a decent judge of character. You've got honest eyes, even if they've seen too much trouble for someone your age." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. Lucy swallowed hard against the sudden burning in her throat. "When would I start? Can you ride?" When she shook her head, Isaac gestured toward a sturdy bay horse tied to the hitching post nearby. "Then you'll ride with me." Wagon's in for repairs and won't be ready until tomorrow. Unless you'd rather wait and come out then. Every instinct told Lucy to be careful, to not trust this too easy solution to her problems. But the alternative was spending another night in whatever shelter she could find with dwindling funds, hoping to find work that probably didn't exist in this rough cattle town. And despite her wariness, something about Isaac Emerson made her want to take the risk. "I'll come now," she decided. The ride out to the ranch was both terrifying and exhilarating. Lucy had never been on a horse before, and sitting in front of Isaac in the saddle, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins, felt far too intimate. Yet he kept a respectful distance as much as possible, his voice steady as he pointed out landmarks and explained the layout of his property. "Got about 2,000 acres, he told her as they rode through rolling grassland dotted with cattle. "Built it up over the last 7 years from nothing. Was a cowhand myself before, saved every penny until I could buy my first 100 head and lease some land. Bought the property outright 3 years ago." "You did all this yourself?" Lucy couldn't keep the amazement from her voice. "Had help from good men." "The 4 hands I've got now have been with me since near the beginning. They're loyal and hardworking, and I pay them fair. I don't tolerate drinking on the job, fighting, or disrespect. Any man who crosses those lines finds himself looking for work elsewhere." The ranch house came into view over a rise, and Lucy felt her breath catch. It was a sprawling single-story structure built of weathered wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Not fancy, but solid and well-built, sitting in a natural hollow with a creek running behind it and cottonwood trees providing shade. Outbuildings included a large barn, a bunkhouse, and several storage sheds. It spoke of care and planning, of someone building something meant to last. Isaac helped her down from the horse, his hands firm on her waist for just a moment before he stepped back. "Let me show you the house." Inside was chaos. Dishes piled in the dry sink, dust thick on every surface, clothes and tacks scattered across furniture, and the general disorder of men living without a woman's organizing hand. Lucy had seen worse in her years of domestic work, but it still made her fingers itch to start setting things right. "I know it's bad," Isaac said, looking almost embarrassed. "We've been trying to keep up with it, but ranch work doesn't leave much time or energy for housekeeping." "It's nothing I can't handle," Lucy said firmly, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done first. "Where are my quarters?" He led her to a small room off the kitchen that held a narrow bed with a simple frame, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a window with faded curtains that looked out toward the creek. It was sparse, but it was private and clean, and when Isaac demonstrated the lock on the door, Lucy felt something unknot in her chest that had been tight for years. "There's a bathing room through there." Isaac indicated a door on the far side of the kitchen. "We rigged up a system to heat water from the stove. Privy is out back. You need anything else to get settled?" Lucy shook her head, overwhelmed by the simple generosity of having space that was hers alone. "This is more than adequate. Thank you, Mr. Emerson." "Isaac," he corrected gently. "We're not formal folk out here. Let me introduce you to the hands, and then I'll leave you to get settled and start however you see fit." The 4 ranch hands were a varied bunch. Tommy Yates was barely 20, eager and friendly with sun-bleached hair and an easy smile. Marcus Webb was older, maybe 40, quiet but with kind eyes and a careful way of speaking. The other 2 were brothers, James and Robert Cordell, both in their late 20s, stocky and strong, with the look of men who'd worked hard their entire lives. They greeted Lucy with a mixture of relief and curiosity, clearly desperate for decent cooking and a cleaner living space, but uncertain about having a woman in their midst. She met each man's eyes directly, assessing them with the same wariness she'd learned to apply to all strangers, but seeing nothing that raised immediate alarm. "Miss Vaughn will be managing the house from now on," Isaac told them, his voice carrying an edge of authority that made all four men straighten slightly. "She's to be treated with the same respect you'd show your own sister or mother. Anyone who makes her uncomfortable will answer to me." "Understood," a chorus of "yes, boss" followed, and Lucy felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. Protected. When was the last time anyone had thought to protect her? After the men returned to their work, Isaac lingered in the kitchen doorway. "I meant what I said. You have any trouble from anyone, you tell me immediately. And I know you don't know me from Adam, so I'll make sure I'm not in the house alone with you until you feel comfortable. One of the hands will always be nearby, or I'll make sure to keep to my work outside. I want you to feel safe here." The consideration in his words made Lucy's throat tight again. She'd been braced for ulterior motives, for the catch that always came with men offering help to women alone. But Isaac Emerson seemed to genuinely mean what he said, seemed to understand her vulnerability without exploiting it. "I appreciate that," she managed. "I'll start with supper. What time do you all usually eat?" "Sundown, roughly. We're flexible." He smiled then, a slow expression that transformed his serious face and made her stomach do an odd flip. "And Miss Vaughn, I'm glad you took the chance. I think you'll do just fine here." After he left, Lucy stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle in the distance, the murmur of men's voices from the barn, the creak of the house settling in the afternoon heat. It was so different from the cramped, noisy cities she'd bounced between, different from the temporary rooms and suspicious employers she'd endured. She unpacked her few belongings in her room, hanging her 2 dresses in the small wardrobe and placing her Bible on the chest of drawers beside the daguerreotype. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began to work. By sundown, she'd cleaned the kitchen thoroughly, organized the pantry, prepared a meal of salt pork, beans, cornbread, and dried apple cobbler with the supplies she'd found, and set the table with mismatched plates that she'd scrubbed clean. When the men trooped in, dust-covered and weary, they stopped in the doorway and stared. "Lord have mercy," Tommy breathed. "It looks like a real house again." They ate with the kind of focused appreciation that came from months of their own inferior cooking, and the compliments were genuine and profuse. Lucy felt herself relaxing incrementally, allowing herself to feel a cautious pleasure in work well done. Isaac sat at the head of the table, saying little but watching everything with those steady honey-colored eyes. After the meal, the hands retreated to the bunkhouse while Lucy cleaned up, declining Tommy's shy offer to help with the dishes. She was drying the last plate when Isaac appeared in the kitchen doorway, hat in hand. "That was the best meal I've had in months," he said. "You're a fine cook." "Thank you. I learned in the orphanage kitchen." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she tensed, waiting for the pity or judgment that usually followed mention of her background. Instead, Isaac just nodded. "Hard place to grow up, I'd imagine." "Better than some alternatives," Lucy said carefully. "At least there was food and a roof, even if neither was particularly good." "Where's your family?" The question was gentle, genuinely curious rather than prying. "Dead. My mother passed when I was 6, my father 2 years later. Cholera outbreak in St. Louis. I don't remember them very well, if I'm being honest. The orphanage was all I really knew until they turned me out at 16. 16? Isaac's jaw tightened. "That's too young to be on your own." "It's the way of things," Lucy said, surprised by the anger she heard in his voice on her behalf. "They keep you until you're old enough to work, then they need the space for the next batch of children. I'm not special in that regard. Maybe you should be." He said it quietly, almost to himself, then straightened. "You did good work today, Lucy. I can already tell this place is going to run smoother with you here. Get some rest. Tomorrow will likely be just as full." He left before she could respond, and Lucy found herself standing in the clean kitchen with tears prickling her eyes for the second time that day. She couldn't remember the last time someone had expressed outrage at the injustices she'd suffered, the last time anyone had suggested she deserved better than what she'd been given. That first week on the ranch passed in a blur of hard work. Lucy cleaned years of neglect from the house, organized systems for laundry and mending, took inventory of supplies and planned meals, and slowly began to understand the rhythms of ranch life. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, packed lunches for the men when they were working distant pastures, prepared hearty suppers, and fell into bed exhausted each night. But it was good exhaustion, earned rather than desperate. And slowly, day by day, she felt some of the constant tension that had lived in her shoulders for years beginning to ease. Isaac was true to his word about keeping things proper. He was rarely in the house during the day, occupied with the endless work of running a cattle ranch. When he did come in, there was always at least one other person nearby, and he maintained a respectful distance that never felt cold, just careful. He spoke to her with the same straightforward courtesy he showed his men, asked her opinion on household matters, and made sure she had everything she needed to do her job well. Yet, Lucy found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. The way he moved with the confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, the patience he showed with the horses, the quiet authority that made the hands respect him without fear. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably only 28 or 29, but there was a steadiness to him that made him seem older, solid as bedrock. One evening at the end of her second week, Lucy was hanging laundry behind the house, taking advantage of the last light, when she heard raised voices from the barn. She tensed, old instincts flaring, ready to flee if violence erupted. But then she heard Isaac's voice, calm and firm, cutting through the argument. "I don't care whose fault it was. We don't solve problems with fists on this ranch. James, you think Robert was too slow bringing up the herd. Robert, you think James was pushing the cattle too hard. You're both good men and you're both tired. Walk away, cool off, and tomorrow you'll remember your brothers who have worked together your whole lives." There was a moment of tense silence, then the sound of footsteps moving in opposite directions. Lucy relaxed, impressed by how Isaac had diffused the situation without threats or force, just reasonable words and the expectation that his men would live up to better standards. She was turning back to the laundry when Isaac came around the corner of the house and nearly collided with her. His hands came up instinctively to steady her, gripping her arms gently, and for a moment they stood frozen, closer than they'd ever been. Lucy could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, smell the sun and leather and honest sweat on him, feel the warmth of his hands through her sleeves. "Sorry," he said, stepping back quickly. "Didn't realize you were out here. I heard the argument." Lucy's voice came out breathier than intended. "You handled it well." Isaac shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "They're good men, just needed reminding." He paused, studying her face in the fading light. "You settled in all right. Everything working out like you hoped. Better," Lucy admitted. "This is the longest I've stayed anywhere since I left St. Louis. How long were you on your own before you came here?" There was that gentle curiosity again, the sense that he genuinely wanted to know her, not just extract information. 6 years. I've worked in boarding houses, hotels, saloons, private homes, anywhere that would hire me for domestic work. Some places were decent, most weren't. I never stayed long. Either the work dried up, or the town got too dangerous, or the employer got ideas about what a young woman alone might be willing to do for security. She met his eyes, challenging him to judge her. That must have been terrifying, Isaac said quietly. Never knowing if you'd be safe, never having anywhere stable to call home. The understanding in his voice nearly broke her. I got used to it. You adapt or you don't survive. You shouldn't have had to adapt to that. There was that anger again, directed not at her but at a world that had failed her. Everyone deserves a place where they feel safe. Do you? The question escaped before Lucy could stop it. Too personal, too probing. But something about the shadows in Isaac's eyes made her think he understood instability in his own way. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out toward the darkening horizon. "My father drank," he finally said. "Mean drunk. My mother died when I was 12, and after that, there was nothing to keep his temper in check. I left home at 14, lied about my age to get work as a cowhand. Spent 10 years working other men's ranches, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots because I didn't know how, didn't think I deserved to." "What changed?" Lucy asked softly. "I was 24, working a drive up to Kansas. Met an old rancher named Tom Harrison who saw something in me, I guess. Took me aside one night and asked me what I was running from. When I told him, he said the best revenge against a bad father is becoming a good man, building something solid, proving you're not your history." Isaac looked at her then, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart ache. "He loaned me the money for my first cattle, co-signed on my land lease. Believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He died 2 years back, and I named this ranch after him. The Harrison Ranch, though everyone just calls it the Emerson place now." "That's why you hired me," Lucy said, understanding flooding through her. "You saw someone who needed what you once needed." "Maybe," Isaac acknowledged. "Or maybe I just saw a woman with more courage than most men I've known, still standing after years of being knocked down, still willing to try." He took a breath, then said in a rush, "I know it's only been 2 weeks, Lucy, but I hope you'll stay. Not just for the work, though you're damn good at it, but because I think you could build something here, same as I did. Build a life that's yours, stable and safe." The offer hung between them in the gathering darkness, laden with possibility. Lucy felt tears burning her eyes again, overwhelmed by the simple generosity of it, by this man who barely knew her yet saw her worth. "I'll stay," she whispered, "as long as you'll have me." Isaac's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good, that's real good." They stood there for another moment, something unspoken shifting between them, something that felt like the beginning of trust. Then Tommy's voice called from the bunkhouse asking about supper, and the spell broke. Isaac tipped his hat to Lucy and headed toward the barn, and she finished hanging the laundry with hands that shook just slightly. That night, lying in her small room with the door locked out of habit rather than fear, Lucy admitted to herself what she'd been trying to ignore. She was drawn to Isaac Emerson in a way that terrified her. Not because he seemed dangerous, but because he didn't. Because he made her want to believe in kindness without cost, in the possibility of a life built on something other than survival. But wanting something and deserving it were different things, and Lucy had learned long ago not to hope for too much. The weeks folded into months, spring turning to the fierce heat of Texas summer. Lucy established herself as the heart of the ranch household, managing everything with quiet efficiency. The house had never run smoother, the men had never eaten better, and the general atmosphere shifted from the rough chaos of a bachelor establishment to something more like a home. And through it all, Lucy and Isaac circled each other in a careful dance of growing friendship. They talked during meals, Isaac sharing his plans for the ranch and asking her opinion, which still surprised her every time. He wanted to expand the herd, maybe try breeding horses as a side venture. Lucy suggested practical improvements to the house: a better stove, a proper bathing tub, screens for the windows to keep out insects. He listened to everything she said like it mattered, like her comfort and ideas had value. She learned that he was 29, that he'd taught himself to read from a Bible his mother had given him before she died, that he had a quiet sense of humor that surfaced unexpectedly. He loved this land with a passion that made his whole face light up when he talked about it, saw the ranch as more than property, but as proof that his life meant something. Isaac learned that Lucy had a gift for growing things, discovered when she started a kitchen garden behind the house. That she sang while she worked, old hymns from the orphanage, her voice sweet and clear. That she was wickedly smart, could calculate figures in her head faster than he could with pencil and paper, and had opinions on everything from cattle breeding to politics that she'd never been encouraged to share before. They talked about books, the few each had read, sharing them back and forth. Isaac had a small collection, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a battered copy of The Last of the Mohicans and some poetry that had belonged to his mother. Lucy treasured each loan, reading by lamplight in her room, excited to discuss the stories with him over breakfast. The ranch hands noticed the growing connection between their boss and the housekeeper, exchanged knowing looks and small smiles, but said nothing. Lucy was so clearly good for Isaac, softening some of the hard edges loneliness had carved into him, and he was just as clearly good for her, the haunted wariness in her eyes gradually fading to something calmer. But neither Lucy nor Isaac moved beyond friendship. Both had been hurt too many times, learned too well to protect themselves. Both were terrified of risking the good thing they'd built by wanting more. Then came a sweltering afternoon in late July, when Lucy was in the kitchen preserving tomatoes from her garden, the heat from the stove making the room feel like an oven despite the open windows. She'd sent the men out with cold lunches and wasn't expecting anyone back until supper. So she'd let down her hair to cool her neck and rolled her sleeves up past her elbows, propriety sacrificed to practicality. She was lifting a heavy pot of boiling water when she misjudged the weight, and it tilted, scalding water sloshing toward her arms. She cried out and jerked back, losing her grip entirely, and the pot would have crashed to the floor if strong hands hadn't suddenly been there, taking the weight, setting it safely on the stove. "Are you hurt?" Isaac demanded, his voice sharp with fear. He'd come in without her hearing, must have returned to the house for something and heard her cry. Now he was gripping her arms gently, examining them for burns, his face pale under his tan. "I'm fine," Lucy assured him, shaken by how close she'd come to serious injury. "Just clumsy." "You startled me. I should have called out, let you know I was here. Damn it, Lucy, you could have been badly burned." His hands were still on her arms and she could feel them trembling slightly. When she looked up, the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "But I wasn't," she said softly. "You caught it, this time." He was standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the pulse jumping in his throat. "Lucy, I can't stand the thought of you getting hurt. I'm tougher than I look." She meant it as a joke, trying to lighten the sudden tension, but it came out wrong, too vulnerable, exposing too much of the lonely truth of her life. "I know you are," Isaac said quietly, his thumbs stroking small circles on her arms through her sleeves. "You're the strongest person I've ever met." But strength shouldn't have to be the same thing as alone. The words hit something deep inside her, some wall she'd built carefully over years of protecting herself. "I've always been alone," she whispered. "I don't know how to be anything else. I could teach you." His voice was rough, unsteady. "If you'd let me, if you wanted to learn." Lucy's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. "Isaac, I don't know what you're asking. I'm asking if you feel it too, this thing between us. I'm asking if you lie awake at night thinking about me the way I think about you. I'm asking if you'd be willing to risk believing that maybe we could build something together, not just a working relationship, but something real." She should say no. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to protect herself, to not hope for something that could hurt so badly if it failed. But Lucy had spent 6 years being careful, being alone, never letting anyone close, and she was tired. So tired of being strong all by herself. "I confessed she'd never known stability," she said, the words tumbling out without permission, raw and honest. "That's what you need to understand. I've never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home, never had anyone I could count on, never known what it feels like to trust that tomorrow will look like today. I want to believe in what you're offering, Isaac, but I don't know how. I'm afraid I'll ruin it because I don't know how to do anything but run when things get hard." Isaac's hand slid up to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "Then don't run. Let me be your stability. Let me be as steady as the mountains you've never been able to lean against." "I'm not going anywhere, Lucy. I'm here, I'm real, and I'm not going to hurt you or abandon you or make you feel like you have to be anything other than exactly who you are." "How can you promise that?" She was crying now, hadn't even realized it until she felt the tears on her cheeks. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're kind and strong and brave. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you sing hymns while you cook and that you talk to the plants in your garden and that you're terrified of horses but you're trying to get over it. I know you deserve someone who sees your worth, who'll make you feel safe, who'll be the steady thing in your life you've never had before." He leaned his forehead against hers, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And I know I'm falling in love with you and I don't want to fight it anymore." The declaration shattered something in Lucy, some last desperate defense against hope. She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her, and it didn't matter who moved first because they were suddenly wrapped up in each other, years of loneliness and longing pouring into the connection. Isaac kissed like he did everything else, steady and sure, his hands cradling her face like she was precious, like she was something to be treasured rather than taken. Lucy clung to him, drowning in sensation, in the simple, overwhelming truth that she was cared for, that this good man wanted her not despite her damaged history but including all of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers again. "Tell me you'll stay," he said roughly. "Not as my housekeeper, but as my partner, as the woman I'm courting with full intent to marry if you'll have me. Tell me you'll let me prove that I mean what I say, that I can be what you need." "I'm scared," Lucy admitted. "I've never done this before. Never let anyone this close." "I'm scared too," Isaac confessed. "Terrified I'll mess this up, that I'll let you down somehow, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone. Please, Lucy, give us a chance." She looked into his honey-colored eyes and saw the same vulnerability she felt, the same desperate hope. And she thought about the last months, how he'd been nothing but good to her, how he'd kept every promise, how he'd made her feel valued and safe and seen. Maybe that was what stability looked like. Not the absence of fear, but someone standing beside you through it. "All right," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay, I'll try. I'll let you court me and see where it leads." The smile that broke across Isaac's face was brilliant, transforming him from handsome to beautiful. He kissed her again, soft and sweet this time, a promise rather than a claim. "I'm going to make you so happy," he said against her lips. "I'm going to spend every day proving you made the right choice." "You already do," Lucy said, and realized with a start that it was true. She was happy here, happier than she'd been since before her parents died, maybe happier than she'd ever been. They stood there in the sweltering kitchen, holding each other, until the sound of horses in the yard made them step apart. Isaac squeezed her hand once, his eyes full of promise, then went to greet whoever was arriving. Lucy turned back to her tomatoes, but everything had changed. The world looked different now, brighter, full of possibility instead of threat. That evening at supper, Isaac announced their courtship to the ranch hands with simple directness. "Lucy and I are seeing each other now with intent toward marriage. I expect you all to treat her with the same respect as always, but also understand she's not just the housekeeper anymore. She's going to be the lady of this house." The hands erupted in congratulations and knowing grins, clearly having anticipated this development. Tommy actually whooped, earning a glare from Marcus, but making both Lucy and Isaac laugh. Over the next months, their courtship unfolded with a sweetness that made Lucy's chest ache. Isaac was patient and thoughtful, never pushing her further than she was ready to go, always conscious of her fears even as he gently challenged them. He taught her to ride, spending hours helping her overcome her terror of horses, his steady presence making her brave. They took long rides together in the evenings when work was done, exploring the ranch property, Isaac showing her every corner of the land he loved. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers picked on his way back from checking fence lines, a new book from a trip into Jefferson, a length of pretty fabric he'd noticed her admiring. Nothing expensive or ostentatious, but thoughtful, chosen because he'd been paying attention to what made her smile. Lucy learned to express affection too, in the ways she knew how. She made Isaac's favorite foods, mended his clothes with tiny, careful stitches, left small notes in his saddlebags when he had to be away for the day. She let herself be vulnerable, sharing more of her history, the hard and ugly parts, trusting him not to use them against her. They talked about everything. Isaac's plans for the future, wanting to build the ranch into something he could pass on to children someday. Lucy's secret dreams of maybe teaching, of helping other children who'd had rough starts like hers. They discussed politics and religion, discovered they disagreed on some things and laughed about it, learning that differences didn't have to divide. And through it all, Isaac was exactly what he'd promised to be: steady, reliable, present. When Lucy had nightmares about her past, woke up scared and disoriented, he sat with her on the porch until dawn, just being there, not trying to fix anything, just offering the comfort of his presence. When she got frustrated with herself for still being afraid sometimes, still expecting the good thing to end, he reminded her gently that healing wasn't linear, that he'd wait however long it took for her to fully trust. By the time autumn painted the Texas prairie in gold and amber, Lucy knew she was in love with Isaac Emerson. Completely, wholly, irrevocably in love. He'd become her rock, her safe place, the steady thing she'd never known she could have. And more than that, he made her want to be brave enough to build a future instead of just surviving the present. One cool October evening, Isaac asked her to take a ride with him. They went to a high point on the ranch property where you could see for miles in every direction, the land rolling away in gentle waves, the last light of sunset painting everything in shades of rose and purple. "I want to build our house here," Isaac said, dismounting and helping Lucy down. Big enough for a family, with a wide porch and windows facing the sunrise. I want to see our children playing in that yard, want to grow old watching the seasons change from that porch. Lucy's heart was pounding. Our house, our children. Isaac took both her hands, holding her gaze steady with his own. Lucy Vaughn, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love how you've made my house a home, how you've made me want to be better, steadier, more worthy of you. I love that you chose to trust me even though trust has been betrayed before. I love everything you are and everything we could be together. He took a shaky breath. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being your stability, your steady place to land, the partner you deserve? Lucy was crying, had been since he started speaking. Yes, she managed through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. I love you, Isaac. You've given me everything I never knew I needed, everything I'd stopped letting myself want. Yes. Isaac swept her into his arms, spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, thoroughly, a promise and a celebration and a beginning all at once. I'll build you a life you never want to run from, he vowed against her lips. I'll be so steady that you'll never doubt I'll be there tomorrow and the day after and every day until we're old and gray. You already have, Lucy said, cupping his face in her hands. You've already given me a home, Isaac. Not a place, but a feeling. You're my home. They were married on a cold November day in the small church in Jefferson, with the ranch hands as witnesses, and a handful of townsfolk who'd gotten to know Lucy through her occasional shopping trips. She wore a new dress Isaac had commissioned from the seamstress, simple but beautiful in deep blue wool. He wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking nervous and happy and impossibly handsome. When the preacher asked if she took Isaac Emerson to be her lawfully wedded husband, Lucy's voice rang out clear and strong, no hesitation, no doubt. I do. And when Isaac slipped his mother's wedding ring, which he'd kept safe all these years, onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her until death parted them, Lucy believed him. Believed in the future they would build together, in the steadiness he offered, in her own worthiness to receive it. The ranch hands had decorated the house while they were in town, strung up garlands and cooked a feast, and there was music and dancing and laughter late into the night. Lucy danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling something she'd never felt before. Complete. Home. Stable in a way that had nothing to do with places and everything to do with the man who held her close and looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. That night, in the bedroom they would now share in the house Isaac had built with his own hands, he loved her with the same steadiness he brought to everything else. Patient and thorough, focused on her pleasure, making her feel cherished and safe and desired all at once. Lucy gave herself fully for the first time in her life. No walls, no fear, just trust and love and the profound relief of finally letting someone see all of her. Afterward, wrapped in Isaac's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to its normal steady rhythm, Lucy finally understood what stability meant. It wasn't about staying in one place or having money in the bank, or even having a roof over her head, though those things mattered. It was about this, having someone whose love didn't waver, who showed up day after day, who'd proven through actions and not just words that he would be there through whatever came. I spent so long thinking I was broken, she whispered into the darkness. Too damaged to deserve this kind of happiness. Isaac's arms tightened around her. You were never broken. You were surviving, and that took more strength than most people will ever understand. But you don't have to just survive anymore, Lucy. You can live now. We both can. She tilted her face up to kiss him, soft and sweet. Thank you for seeing me, for not giving up even when I was too scared to hope, for being steady when everything in my life had always been chaos. Thank you for trusting me, Isaac replied, for taking the risk, for letting me love you. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. The first year of their marriage was an education in happiness for Lucy. She'd never realized how good ordinary days could be when you knew they would keep coming, when you weren't constantly braced for disaster. She and Isaac fell into comfortable rhythms, working side by side to keep the ranch running, planning improvements, talking about the future with the confidence of people who believed they had one. The ranch hands adjusted to having a married couple in the main house, respecting Lucy's new role as Isaac's wife while still coming to her with the practical matters of running the household. She'd become a true partner in the ranch operation, her opinion valued on everything from which cattle to sell to whether they should invest in better fencing. In the spring, Lucy realized she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening after supper, suddenly nervous after months of certainty in his love. What if he saw her differently now? What if she wasn't a good mother? What if the chaos of her own childhood meant she didn't know how to give a child stability? Isaac's reaction eliminated all her fears. He shouted with joy, picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then immediately became comically overprotective, wanting her to rest constantly, worried about her doing any work at all. It took Tommy pointing out that women had been having babies while working ranches for generations, before Isaac calmed down enough to let Lucy continue her normal routine, though he still watched her like a hawk. As her belly grew through the summer months, Isaac spent his evenings building a cradle in the barn, carving it from good oak, sanding it smooth, wanting everything perfect for their child. Lucy sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were, trying to imagine a baby of her own to dress in them. They talked late into the night about what kind of parents they wanted to be, both determined to give their children the stability and love they'd lacked themselves. Isaac wanted his children to feel safe to take risks, to know they had a home to return to no matter what. Lucy wanted her children to feel valued and heard, to know their thoughts and feelings mattered. "Our baby is going to be so loved," she said one night, Isaac's hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of their child. "So wanted. Everything I never had." "Everything we both never had," Isaac corrected. "We're building something new together, Lucy, breaking the cycle. Our children will know what it feels like to be secure, to have parents who show up, who stay, who love them no matter what." In late October, just past their first wedding anniversary, Lucy went into labor. It was long and difficult, hours of pain that made her scream despite her determination to be stoic. Isaac stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, letting her squeeze until his bones ached, murmuring encouragement and love, his steady presence the only thing that kept her from giving in to fear. Finally, as dawn broke over the ranch, their son was born. Tiny and red-faced and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his displeasure at being forced into the world. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Lucy's arms, and she stared down at this impossible miracle, this child who was half her and half Isaac, and sobbed with overwhelming love. "A boy," Isaac breathed, his own eyes wet as he gently touched their son's impossibly small hand. "A son. Lucy, we have a son." "What should we name him?" Lucy asked, unable to look away from her baby's face. Isaac was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Thomas Harrison Emerson. Tommy for the young hand who's always so full of joy to honor him. Harrison for the man who gave me the chance to build this life. And Emerson because he's ours, born into stability and love and everything we never had but are determined to give. Thomas Harrison Emerson, Lucy repeated, trying it out. Tommy, that's perfect. The baby's first months were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Lucy had never been so tired, never felt so stretched, but also never so fulfilled. Isaac was a hands-on father despite the demands of the ranch, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night, insisting that Lucy rest when she could. The ranch hands were completely besotted with little Tommy, taking turns holding him and making ridiculous faces to try to get him to smile. Even taciturn Marcus could be found cooing at the baby when he thought no one was watching. The ranch had become a true family, not just a business arrangement but a community bound by affection and shared purpose. As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, Lucy watched Isaac with their son and fell even more deeply in love with her husband. He was patient and playful, teaching their boy about the ranch, letting him help with simple tasks, encouraging his curiosity and independence while also making sure he understood boundaries and safety. "You're such a good father," she told him one evening after they'd put Tommy to bed and were sitting on the porch together, watching the sun set. Isaac pulled her close against his side. "I'm trying to be everything mine wasn't, to be present and patient and steady. To make sure our children always know they're loved and valued and safe." "Children," Lucy raised an eyebrow. "Plural, if you're willing," Isaac said, grinning. "I kind of like this family thing we've got going. Wouldn't mind adding to it." Lucy laughed, kissing his cheek. "Give me a little time to recover, but yes, I'd like more children. I'd like this house full of noise and love and chaos that feels safe because we're in it together." "I love you," Isaac said, the words as steady and sure as everything else about him. "I love the life we've built. I love who you've become, how much you've healed, how you've let yourself believe in stability." "You made that possible," Lucy said seriously. "You kept every promise, Isaac. You've been exactly as steady as the mountains, just like you said. You've given me a life I never dreamed I could have." "We gave each other that," Isaac corrected. "You took the risk to trust me to stay to build this with me. That took as much courage as anything I've done." He kissed her deeply, thoroughly. "Here's to many more years of building together." The years unfolded with a sweetness that never stopped surprising Lucy. 2 years after Tommy was born, they welcomed a daughter they named Rose Marie, for the wildflowers that had been among Isaac's first gifts to Lucy, and for the mother Isaac barely remembered, but honored still. Rose was a quiet, thoughtful child, content to observe the world with serious eyes, completely different from her rambunctious brother. The ranch continued to prosper under Isaac's careful management and Lucy's organizational skills. They expanded the herd, built additional outbuildings, even started the horse breeding program Isaac had dreamed about. The ranch hands stayed on year after year, loyal to the family they'd become part of, and Isaac made sure they shared in the prosperity, paying fair wages and bonuses when cattle sales went well. Lucy started a school for the ranch children and the few families that lived in the area, teaching reading and arithmetic in the front room of the house, 2 days a week. It fulfilled that old dream of hers, giving back, helping children have opportunities she'd never had. Isaac built her proper desks and a chalkboard, supported her fully, proud of his wife's compassion and intelligence. When Tommy was 7 and Rose was 5, Lucy gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel Jacob and Sarah Jane. The house was chaos with 4 children, constantly noisy, full of laughter and occasional tears, toys underfoot and childish voices calling for attention. It was everything Lucy had never had growing up, and she treasured every exhausting moment. Isaac was in his element as a father of four, somehow managing to give each child individual attention while also teaching them to work together, to care for each other, to understand that family meant showing up for one another. He was firm but fair, setting boundaries while also encouraging independence and critical thinking. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Lucy back to the spot where he'd proposed, the high point where he'd talked about building a house for their family. "I never built that house," he said, holding her hands, "but I built something better. A home filled with love and children and laughter. A life that matters." Lucy looked out over the ranch, golden in the afternoon sun, and thought about the terrified woman who'd arrived in Jefferson a decade earlier with nothing but a carpet bag and crushing loneliness. She thought about the journey from that desperate place to this moment, standing beside the man who'd become her everything, surrounded by the family they'd created together. "You gave me stability," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You became as steady as the mountains, and you taught me that I could be steady too. That my past didn't define my future. That I was worthy of love and permanence, and a life built on more than just survival." Isaac pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was precious, like he had from the very beginning. "You gave me purpose," he said. "A reason to build something that mattered. You made me believe I could be more than my father's son, that I could create something good and lasting. You made me a better man, Lucy." "We made each other better," Lucy said, echoing his words from their wedding night. "We healed together." They stood there on the hill, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, the ranch spread out in all its hard-won glory. The house where their children played, the barn where Isaac worked, the gardens Lucy tended, the life they'd built together from nothing but determination and love. As they rode back down toward home, Lucy thought about what she'd tell that frightened young woman from a decade ago if she could. She'd tell her to take the risk, to trust the kind-eyed rancher, to believe that stability was possible even for those who'd never known it. She'd tell her that the heart could heal when it was held gently, that walls could come down when someone proved they'd never use vulnerability as a weapon, that love could be steady as bedrock rather than shifting as sand. The children came running to meet them as they approached the house, Tommy shouting about something he'd built, Rose quietly showing off a drawing she'd made, the twins babbling excitedly in their still-developing language. Isaac swung down from his horse and was immediately swarmed, laughing as he tried to give attention to all four at once. Lucy sat for a moment, just watching, drinking in the scene. Her family, her home, her life that she'd built through courage and trust and Isaac's unshakable steadiness. The chaos of children and the solid presence of her husband. The ranch hands calling greetings from the barn. The smell of supper cooking, because the teenage daughter of one of the hands helped with housework now that Lucy had 4 children to manage. This was what stability looked like, she realized. Not the absence of chaos or challenge or change, but the presence of people who showed up, who stayed, who loved through hard times and good. It was Isaac's hand reaching for hers across the dinner table after 10 years of marriage with the same steadiness as when they'd first courted. It was children who'd never known hunger or abandonment, who took security for granted because they'd never experienced anything else. It was a community built on loyalty and shared purpose, people who worked together and looked out for one another. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Lucy and Isaac sat on the porch together as they did most evenings, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Happy?" Isaac asked softly, the way he often did, always checking, always making sure she felt secure. "So happy," Lucy confirmed, the words absolutely true. "More than I ever imagined possible." "Me too," Isaac said, kissing the top of her head. "Every single day I wake up grateful. Grateful you took a chance on me. Grateful you trusted me when trust was so hard for you. Grateful you let me prove that steady love exists." "I'm grateful you saw me," Lucy replied. "Really saw me, not just someone to fill a position but a person with worth and value. I'm grateful you were patient while I learned to trust. I'm grateful you kept every single promise you've ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of knowing each other deeply. Lucy thought about the sermon she'd heard in church last Sunday, about building your house on rock instead of sand, about foundations that could withstand any storm. That's what she and Isaac had built together. A foundation of steadiness and trust that had weathered challenges, losses, hard years and good, and emerged stronger for it. The years continued to unfold, each one adding to the rich tapestry of their life together. The children grew, developed their own personalities and passions. Tommy became a skilled horseman like his father, taking over more of the ranch operations as he moved through his teenage years. Rose discovered a gift for teaching and began helping Lucy with the school, patient and creative with the younger children. The twins were inseparable, always plotting some mischief, keeping everyone on their toes with their energy and imagination. Lucy and Isaac grew older together with grace, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes from years of laughter and sun. Their love deepened too, became something richer and more complex than the desperate need of their early days. It was comfort now, and companionship, and the profound peace that comes from being fully known and fully accepted. The ranch continued to prosper, became known throughout Texas as one of the best-run operations in the state. Isaac's reputation for fairness and integrity meant he never lacked for good hands willing to work for him, and many of the men who came stayed for years, some even bringing their families to settle nearby. Lucy's school grew too, eventually requiring its own building that Isaac constructed with help from the hands and older boys. She taught 3 days a week now, loved watching children learn and grow, felt deep satisfaction in giving them opportunities for education regardless of their circumstances. Several of her students went on to attend proper schools in the cities, came back to visit, and tell her how much her teaching had meant to them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party, inviting half the county. The house and yard were packed with people who'd been touched by Isaac and Lucy's generosity and steadiness over the years. Families they'd helped through hard times, young people who'd been given work when they needed it, children Lucy had taught, neighbors who'd come to rely on the Emersons as pillars of their community. Isaac gave a short speech, thanking everyone for coming, but mostly looking at Lucy with eyes full of love. 20 years ago, I was lucky enough to meet a woman who needed stability and brave enough to trust me to provide it. But what I didn't realize then was that in giving her a steady place to land, she'd give me purpose and meaning and a life richer than I ever imagined. Lucy Emerson is the best decision I ever made, and I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. Lucy couldn't speak through her tears, could only pull Isaac into a kiss that made their children groan good-naturedly and the assembled guests cheer. When she finally found her voice, she said simply, "You kept your promise. Every single day for 20 years, you've been as steady as the mountains. You've been my home, my anchor, my safe harbor. I love you, Isaac Emerson, today and always." As the party continued around them, Lucy thought about the journey from that terrified woman in Jefferson to this moment. She thought about confession and trust, about the courage it took to believe in stability when you'd never known it, about the profound gift of someone who kept showing up day after day until fear transformed into certainty. The Wild West was a hard place, full of danger and uncertainty, where most people struggled just to survive. But somehow, Lucy and Isaac had carved out something beautiful within that harshness. They'd built a life on steadiness and love, created a family and community that embodied the best of what humanity could be when people chose compassion over cruelty, commitment over convenience. Years continued to pass, bringing the usual joys and sorrows of any long life. They lost Marcus to pneumonia one harsh winter, mourned him deeply, and made sure his widow was cared for. They celebrated when Tommy married a sweet girl from town and started his own family, when Rose fell in love with a teacher from San Antonio and moved there but visited regularly. The twins eventually went their separate ways too, Samuel taking over more of the ranch operations while Sarah went to nursing school and came back to serve the community as a midwife. Through it all, Lucy and Isaac remained the constants, their love the bedrock on which the extended family and community was built. They grew old together with dignity, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp, their affection for each other undiminished by time. On a warm spring evening, when Lucy was 62 and Isaac was 69, they sat on the porch they'd shared for so many years, watching the sun set over the land they'd built a life upon. Isaac had been slowing down lately, his heart not as strong as it once was, and both of them knew they were in the twilight of their time together. "No regrets?" Isaac asked, holding her hand, his grip still steady despite his age. "Not a single one," Lucy said firmly. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed, Isaac. A home, a family, stability that never wavered. You loved me when I didn't know how to be loved. You were patient when I was afraid. You became exactly what you promised to be. Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did," Isaac said softly. "From that first day in Jefferson, when I saw you picking up your scattered belongings after the gunfight, I knew you were someone special. Someone worth fighting for, worth being steady for. You made me want to be the man I always hoped I could be." Lucy leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the sun's warmth on her face, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch. Horses in the pasture, cattle lowing in the distance, the voices of grandchildren playing in the yard, the creak of the porch swing. Every sound was home, was safety, was the life she'd built through trust and courage and Isaac's unshakable love. "When I'm gone," Isaac said quietly, and Lucy started to protest, but he squeezed her hand gently. "When I'm gone, I need you to know something. You were never broken, Lucy. You were never too damaged or too afraid or too anything. You were perfect exactly as you were, and letting you into my life was the greatest gift I ever received. Promise me you'll remember that. Promise me you'll know how much you were loved, how much you mattered, how you changed everything for the better just by being you." Lucy was crying now, couldn't hold back the tears. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "I need you. You're my steady place." "You are your own steady place now," Isaac said gently. "Look at everything you've built, Lucy. Look at our children and grandchildren, all of them secure and loved and confident because you showed them what stability looks like. Look at the lives you've touched through teaching. Look at this ranch, still thriving after 40 years because you've been my partner in every decision. You don't need me to be steady anymore, my love. You became the mountain yourself." The truth of his words settled over her like a benediction. He was right. She wasn't the terrified woman from Jefferson anymore. She was Lucy Emerson, wife and mother and grandmother, teacher and rancher's partner, a woman who'd built something lasting from nothing but courage and love. The stability Isaac had offered her hadn't made her dependent, it had made her strong. Strong enough to stand on her own if she had to, though God willing, that day was still far off. "I love you," she said fiercely. However long we have left, whether it's days or decades, I love you with everything I am." "I love you too," Isaac replied, his voice thick with emotion. "My Lucy. My steady, strong, beautiful Lucy. You've made my life everything I dreamed and more." They sat together as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, feeling the steady beat of each other's hearts. The stars came out overhead, the same stars they'd watched together for 40 years of evenings, constant as their love, eternal as the mountains. Isaac lived another 3 years, slowing gradually but never losing his mental sharpness or his affection for Lucy. He got to see 2 more great-grandchildren born, got to watch Tommy's eldest son take over significant ranch operations, got to celebrate Lucy's 65th birthday surrounded by family and friends and community. When he finally passed in his sleep one autumn night, Lucy beside him as she'd been for 4 decades, the grief was profound but not bitter. He'd lived a full life, loved well and been well loved in return. He'd kept every promise, been steady to the very end, built something that would outlast him by generations. At the funeral, Lucy stood straight and dry-eyed as the preacher spoke about Isaac's character, his integrity, his legacy of steadiness and love. She didn't weep until later, alone in the house they'd shared, when the silence pressed in and she felt the absence of his steady presence for the first time in 42 years. But even in her grief, Lucy knew she would be all right. Isaac had been right in that last conversation on the porch. She was her own steady place now. The stability he'd given her had become part of who she was, internalized and unshakable. She knew how to show up, how to keep going, how to love without fear. He'd taught her all of that through decades of patient example. Lucy lived another 12 years after Isaac's death. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with continued teaching and community involvement, with the satisfaction of seeing the life they'd built together continue to flourish. She never remarried, never wanted to. Isaac had been her great love, her once-in-a-lifetime partner, and she was content to honor his memory by living well, by continuing to embody the steadiness he taught her. On a spring morning when she was 77 years old, Lucy sat on the porch of the ranch house she'd called home for nearly half a century. Her oldest grandson was managing the ranch now, but the house was still hers, would be hers until she died, a testament to the legacy Isaac had built. She could see Tommy working with the horses in the distance, could hear Rose's daughter teaching in the schoolhouse Lucy had founded, could smell lunch cooking as one of the great-granddaughters managed the household Lucy had once run. Everything she and Isaac had created continued, grown and evolved but still rooted in the values they'd established: steadiness, loyalty, love that showed up day after day after day. Lucy closed her eyes, feeling the sun warm on her face, and thought about that gunfight in Jefferson all those years ago, how she'd crouched behind a water trough certain that life would never be more than survival and fear. She thought about Isaac offering her a job, a chance, the beginning of stability. She thought about their first kiss in a hot kitchen, about their wedding, about the birth of their children, about 42 years of steady, faithful love. She thought about confession and trust, about how she'd admitted to never knowing stability, and how Isaac had responded by becoming as immovable as the mountains. How he'd kept that promise every single day until his last breath. How he'd transformed her from someone running from fear into someone who stood steady in her own right. A smile curved Lucy's lips as she drifted off into a peaceful sleep in the afternoon sun. She was ready now, ready to join Isaac wherever souls went after the body gave up. Ready to tell him that she'd kept going after he left, had been strong and steady and true to everything they'd built together. When Tommy found her an hour later, still smiling in her sleep, having passed quietly and peacefully into death. He wept, but also felt profound gratitude. His mother had lived well and loved deeply, had built something beautiful from difficult beginnings, had given her children and grandchildren the greatest gift possible: the security of knowing they were loved unconditionally, and the example of what steadiness looked like embodied in a human life. At Lucy's funeral, the church in Jefferson was packed beyond capacity, people standing outside to pay respects to a woman who'd touched countless lives through her teaching, her kindness, and her quiet example of courage and growth. Tommy spoke about his mother's journey, from orphan to beloved matriarch, about how she and his father had loved each other with a steadiness that had shaped everyone who knew them. "My mother used to tell us that she'd confessed to my father she'd never known stability," Tommy said, his voice steady despite his grief. "And he'd promised to become steady as the mountains for her. But what she taught us is that you don't just receive stability from someone else. You learn it, you internalize it, you become it yourself." My mother became her own mountain, unshakable in her love and her values and her commitment to family and community. That's her real legacy, not just that she was loved steadily, but that she learned to be steady herself and passed that gift on to all of us. They buried Lucy next to Isaac on the hill where he'd proposed, the spot where he'd dreamed of building a house for their family. Over the years, it had become a family cemetery, carefully tended, with space for generations of Emersons to rest in the land they'd loved and worked. The ranch continued for decades more, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own mark while still honoring the foundation Isaac and Lucy had built. The story of their love became family legend, told to each new generation as an example of what commitment looked like, how trust could heal, how steadiness could transform lives. And sometimes, when descendants walked the ranch in the evening and the wind came up just right, they swore they could feel the presence of those two souls who'd started it all. The rancher who'd offered stability to a woman who'd never known it, and the brave woman who'd trusted enough to take the risk. The love that had been steady as mountains and just as eternal, built not on passion alone but on showing up day after day, on keeping promises, on being exactly what was needed when it was needed most. It was a love story that had shaped a family, a community, a legacy that would endure for generations. And it had all started with a gunfight in Jefferson, Texas, a carpetbag spilling into the mud, and a kind-eyed rancher offering a scared young woman exactly what she needed most: stability, safety, and a love that would never waver. In the end, that was the real Wild West romance. Not the dramatic shootouts or grand gestures, but the quiet, steady building of a life together. Two wounded souls finding each other and choosing, day after day, to show up, to stay, to love through challenges and joys alike. Isaac had become Lucy's mountain, and in learning to lean on him, she'd become a mountain herself. Together, they'd created something that outlasted them both, a testament to the transformative power of steady, faithful love. Their story ended where all good stories do, with peace and fulfillment and the knowledge that their time together had mattered. With children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carrying forward the values they'd embodied. With a ranch that still stood strong on the Texas prairie, built on more than land and cattle but on the unshakable foundation of two people who'd promised to be steady for each other, and had kept that promise until their very last breaths. And somewhere in the eternal landscape beyond mortal sight, two souls reunited, still steady, still sure, still bound by a love that neither time nor death could diminish. The rancher and his brave lady, together again at last, their story complete, their legacy secure. Their love proved true beyond all doubt. Steady as the mountains, eternal as the stars, unshakable as the faith they'd placed in each other so many years ago in a dusty Texas town called Jefferson.